On a quiet Texas night, the kind where the air hangs still and the world feels deceptively safe, a call came into dispatch. Urgent. Controlled, but something in the voice, something just beneath the surface, hinted at chaos. The address? A sprawling estate, gated, pristine. The kind of house where nothing should go wrong. Where lives are curated, not unraveled. Inside, the scene was carefully measured. Too measured. A man, unresponsive. A body positioned just so. A tragedy, or something designed to look like one. The responders moved quickly, but the truth had already settled in the room long before they arrived. The kind of truth that doesn't scream, it whispers, waiting to be heard by the right ears. Outside, flashing lights painted the front of the house in red and blue. Neighbors, those who had never stepped past the iron gates, craned their necks for a glimpse of something they weren't supposed to see. Officers spoke in hushed tones, their words lost in the weight of what lay inside. A man who had everything. A man who was untouchable. Dead. And somewhere in that house, past the polished floors and untouched dinner plates, she sat. A quiet sip of wine. A gaze that didn't wander. Not to the lights reflecting off the glass, not to the distant murmurs of men working a crime scene just rooms away. The glass met the table with barely a sound. Hands rested neatly in her lap. Her breath steady. Almost too steady. Grief is a peculiar thing. It shows itself in gasps, in shaking hands, in the inability to sit still. It spills out in waves. Except when it doesn't. No one looked at her twice. No one considered the possibility that this wasn't just a tragedy. That what happened inside that house wasn't a moment of bad luck or cruel fate. That maybe, just maybe, what happened had been decided long before this night ever began. No one suspected her. No one ever would. Before we proceed, we want to say that we are true crime case notes, and here we uncover the truth behind unsettling and haunting case. For more true crime stories that peel back the shadows of human nature, we ask that you please hit the like button, subscribe, comment, and share. Let's continue, shall we? He has always had the kind of success most people only dreamed about. The kind that turned heads in crowded rooms, made people lean in just a little closer when he spoke. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a presence. A man whose name carried weight, whose signature could shift fortunes. Every article, every feature painted the same picture. A visionary, a leader, a man at the top of his game. The money, the power, the influence, it was his to command. And beside him, the perfect wife. The kind who moved through rooms with effortless grace, who knew when to smile, when to listen, when to let him shine. Elegant, poised, the reflection of everything he wanted the world to see. Theirs was the kind of marriage that made people envious. The kind that got written about in glossy magazines, shared in perfectly curated photographs, admired from a distance. Perfect was the word people used. Over and over again. Perfect house. Perfect careers. Perfect marriage. That's what the world saw. Because that's what they were meant to see. Award ceremonies, charity galas, press releases announcing another deal closed, another milestone reached. Flashes of cameras, polished speeches, effortless laughter. The power couple everyone wanted to be. But perfection doesn't come without effort. It doesn't hold itself up. It has to be maintained, kept in place like an expensive suit tailored to fit a body that no longer belongs in it. Somewhere between the board meetings and the jet setting, between the smiling photos and the handshakes, the late nights became routine. At first, there were explanations. Meetings that ran long, last-minute business trips, investors who demanded time zones be ignored. But the explanations stopped after a while. Work was just work. No reason to question it. At least, that's what he assumed. For a long time, the silence between them wasn't uncomfortable. It was just space. The kind every marriage learns to live with. Until one day, space turned into something else. She never asked why he came home late. Never questioned the vague answers, the tired excuses. Never pressed. But she noticed. Noticed the way his voice shifted when his phone lit up, the way a message would come in and he'd glance at it just long enough to read without reacting. Noticed the way he'd turn slightly, positioning his body just enough to shield the screen from view. Notice the way, some mornings, he woke up already elsewhere. Mind distant, attention slipping through his fingers. One night, as he stepped into the shower, he left it behind. Just for a second. Just long enough for the screen to glow in the dark. One message. A name she didn't recognize. A conversation that shouldn't exist. She could have opened it. Could have scrolled, read every word. Let it confirm what her instincts had already whispered to her in the quiet hours of the night. She didn't. Not that night. Not yet. Instead, she placed it back exactly as it was. Because some truths don't need to be rushed. Some answers are better when they come on their own. Indeed, behind the corporate empire, behind the polished exterior and the carefully curated image, was a secret. The kind that doesn't just disappear. The kind that clings, waiting for the right moment to ruin everything. He had spent years building a life that left no room for mistakes. Every deal, every handshake, every word spoken in public was measured, intentional. He knew how quickly power could slip away, how one misstep could turn admiration into disgrace. Image was everything. Control was everything. But control is a fragile thing. It started as something small, something easy to ignore. A conversation that lasted longer than it should. A glance that lingered just a second too long. A curiosity that turned into something more. A name that meant nothing at first but, over time, became impossible to forget. It wasn't supposed to happen. He had spent his whole life knowing exactly what was expected of him. The right schools, the right career, the right marriage. The roles were set, the script written long before he had a say in it. There was no room for deviation. No space for the kind of truth that would unravel everything he had built. But some truths don't ask for permission. The affair wasn't reckless, not at first. It was careful, tucked away in moments that wouldn't be missed. Business trips that lasted an extra night. Meetings that never actually took place. A second phone, one that never left his briefcase. Conversations that existed only in hushed tones, in the safety of hotel rooms, in text messages deleted before they had a chance to leave a mark. But secrets have weight. And the longer you carry them, the heavier they become. He told himself he was in control. That no one knew. That no one would ever know. Until the small signs started appearing. A misplaced phone, found in a room he didn't remember leaving it in. A question that felt too deliberate, too carefully worded. A pause that lasted just a beat too long. She never accused. Never confronted. But she knew. He could feel it in the way she watched him. Not with anger, not with sadness, but with something else. Something quieter. Something that sat just beneath the surface. At first, he tried to ignore it. Told himself he was imagining things. That she was too busy, too distracted with her own world to notice the cracks in his. But doubt is insidious. It doesn't need proof to take hold. It just needs space to grow. And with every passing day, the space between them stretched wider. She stopped asking where he was going. Stopped waiting up when he came home late. Stopped touching him the way she used to. Not out of indifference. Out of certainty. That's when the fear set in. Because if she knew, really knew, it was only a matter of time before someone else did too. And that would destroy everything. This wasn't just about embarrassment. It wasn't about a failed marriage or a broken vow. It was about survival. Because men like him don't get second chances. They don't get to start over. They don't get to explain away mistakes. If this came out, if the wrong person found out, it wouldn't just be a scandal. It would be the end. Of his career. Of his legacy. Of the life he had spent years crafting. And so he did what men like him always do. He calculated. He planned. He considered every possibility. And as the walls closed in, he came to a decision. If she knew, if she was a threat, there was only one way to fix it. No matter what it cost. For there was no other way. He had spent nights weighing the options, running the numbers, calculating the risks. Every outcome led to the same conclusion. She had to be gone before she could ruin him. It wasn't just about her knowing the truth. It was about what she could do with it. The wrong word in the right ear, a single thread pulled, and the entire illusion would collapse. The image, the career, the power, everything. It had to be clean, untraceable, something unfortunate, not suspicious. A loss, not a scandal. Poison seemed easy. A quiet death. No struggle, no evidence of force. He could picture it, an expensive bottle of wine, a familiar routine, a glass handed to her without hesitation. It was almost poetic. A final toast to the life they had built together, before she slipped away into silence. But hesitation ruined the moment. A hesitation she noticed. She took the glass from his hand, but she didn't sip right away. Just held it, watching him. That same gaze that had unsettled him for weeks, the one that said too much without saying anything at all. And then, a quiet smile. A small tilt of the head. A subtle shift of the glass, setting it down without breaking eye contact. Something tightened in his chest. It wasn't the refusal. It wasn't even suspicion. It was something worse. She knew. Not just about the affair. Not just about the betrayal. She knew what was inside that glass. He had never been more certain of anything. The moment passed. She reached for the bottle, poured herself another drink, a fresh glass. Held it up to the light, inspecting it like she had all the time in the world. And then, without a word, she left the room, her untouched glass still sitting between them. His throat was dry. His pulse loud in his ears. He needed another plan. A hired hand, someone to do it for him. Someone without connections, without reason to care. Accidents happen every day. A misstep on the stairs, an unexpected intruder, a car that swerved at the wrong moment. It could be anyone, anywhere. A tragic headline, nothing more. But distance wasn't safety. Distance was exposure. The more hands involved, the more risks he took. And risk wasn't an option. No. It had to be personal. It had to be something only he could control. There was always another way. If not an accident, a tragedy. A loss no one would question. He started small. Shifts in routine. Small details changed in their home. Things moved slightly out of place. Subtle, almost invisible, but just enough to be noticed. Just enough to make someone feel like their mind was betraying them. A missing key. A misplaced letter. A locked door that had never been locked before. She never asked about it. Never said a word. But he saw it. In the way she looked over her shoulder before leaving a room. In the way her fingers hovered over her phone, hesitating, second-guessing herself. A single moment of doubt could be enough. A carefully timed accident, and the whispers would start on their own. Maybe she wasn't herself. Maybe she had been struggling. Maybe no one had noticed until it was too late. A staged tragedy. The perfect story. The perfect ending. Except she didn't break. She moved through their house the same way she always had, untouched by the weight he had placed around her. And that's when he realized she wasn't playing defense. She was waiting. For what, he didn't know. But the longer this went on, the more certain he became. He wasn't the one in control. He was the one being watched. The plan was flawless. Every detail accounted for, every loose end tied before it could reveal. It had to be that way. There was no room for hesitation, no margin for error. This was the night. The final step in a game that had already gone on too long. She wouldn't see it coming. She couldn't. He had spent weeks setting the stage, ensuring that when it happened, when the news broke, when the whispers started, there would be nothing left to question. A tragic accident. A moment of carelessness. That's what they would say. That's what they would believe. Because why would they believe anything else? The opportunity came easily enough. A glass of wine, an ordinary moment in an ordinary evening. He watched as she lifted the glass to her lips, fingers resting delicately around the stem. Just a sip. That's all it would take. Quiet, effortless. But something was wrong. A shift. Barely noticeable, but enough to put a weight in his chest. She wasn't watching him. She was waiting. The first taste of bitterness hit the back of his throat before he understood. The burn seared down his throat, tightening, clawing at his insides. The glass slipped from his fingers, shattering against the floor. Too late. It wasn't supposed to be him. His breath came in short, desperate gasps as he tried to stand, tried to move, tried to make sense of the weight pressing against his chest, the fire coursing through his veins. The room blurred, pulsed, distorted. She was still sitting, still watching, unmoved, like she had known all along. He tried to speak. Nothing. A step forward, legs unsteady beneath him, the world tilting in a way that made no sense. He reached for something, anything, to keep himself upright, but there was nothing to hold on to. He hit the ground hard. No hands reached out to catch him. No voice called for help. Only silence. He had planned every step, accounted for every detail. Except one. The police arrived quickly. Too quickly. A call already placed, a voice steady, the right amount of panic laced into her words. A wife who had just lost her husband. A woman who had no reason to be questioned. They examined the scene. Took notes. Asked their questions. A heart attack, they said. Stress. Overwork. A tragedy. The wine was tested. Nothing unusual. The autopsy revealed nothing. A life ended without violence. A death with no reason to investigate further. No suspects. No evidence. No case. She stood at the funeral, surrounded by condolences, whispers of how unexpected it all was, how devastating. People grieved. Friends offered their sympathies. Associates spoke of his legacy. And through it all, she remained composed. Because justice isn't always loud. Sometimes, it doesn't come with sirens or verdicts or prison bars. Sometimes, it happens in silence. The house felt different now. Quieter. Emptier. But not in the way people expected. Absence leaves a mark, a shadow of what once was, but not here. Here, there was only stillness. A silence that had been waiting for its moment. She sat alone, untouched by the weight of grief that others had carried for her. They had sent flowers. Handwritten notes. Soft murmurs of condolences from people who thought they knew the man she had buried. The devoted husband. The brilliant mind. The powerful leader. But grief is only real when there's something left to mourn. The world had moved on exactly as it was supposed to. The news cycle had run its course. A tragic loss, a respected figure gone too soon. His face splashed across headlines for a moment, replaced just as quickly by another story, another tragedy, another name. His colleagues had spoken about his legacy. His friends had shared memories, shaking their heads at how fragile life could be. They would never know. The secret that had followed him to the grave. The lie that had kept him up at night. The truth that had revealed him long before he ever took that last breath. The world had been so busy mourning the man they thought he was that no one had stopped to question what had really happened. No suspicious circumstances. No loose ends. No reason to dig deeper. And her. She had played the part well. The grieving widow, quiet in her sorrow. Accepting condolences with a downcast gaze, nodding at stories of the man they had lost, never once correcting them. There was no need. The truth wasn't for them. It had never been for them. Her hand rested on the arm of the chair, fingers barely brushing against the smooth envelope on the table beside her. A news article, printed from the last report on the case. The official conclusion. A natural death, they had said. Nothing more to be done. The corner of her lips shifted, just slightly. Not quite a smile, not quite anything at all. Somewhere in the depths of the house, a clock chimed, marking the hour. The sound moved through the empty halls, echoing against walls that had heard more than they should have. Walls that had witnessed the careful unraveling of a plan that had been set in motion long before the man at its center had realized he was no longer the one in control. She exhaled, slow and measured. The past no longer mattered. The secrets, the lies, the mistakes, they had all been buried alongside the man who had spent his final moments realizing that he had never truly been one step ahead. Not once. The police would close the case. His colleagues would mourn. His secrets would be buried with him. And the woman who knew it all? She would move on, without a single suspicion. A reminder that even the most powerful are not immune to the fragility of life. The kind of story people shake their heads at, muttering how unpredictable fate can be before moving on with their own lives. There would be no second look. No reason to question what had already been decided. No proof to suggest otherwise. No evidence that pointed to anything beyond the official report. No suspicious transactions, no security footage revealing a struggle, no unknown substances found in his system. Nothing out of place. Except the woman who had spent years by his side. Maybe it had been his own doing. Maybe the weight of his secrets had been enough to destroy him from the inside out. Maybe, in the end, the pressure was too much, and his body simply gave out. Or maybe, just maybe, there was someone who knew exactly how to pull the final thread without leaving a trace. No fingerprints. No suspicious alibis. No mistakes. A perfect crime. If that's what it was, it had been executed flawlessly. So, what do you think? Did she truly get away with murder? Or was it nothing more than a tragic ending to a life built on deception? Leave your theories in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, make sure to subscribe. Because sometimes, the most shocking crimes are the ones that were never crimes at all.